longevity is a hot topic, and if you've been following the podcast, you recognize that I have an interest in it, and I have a very positive outlook, or at least an optimistic outlook. But sometimes we get skewed in our hope for optimism, and we don't necessarily look at it from a standpoint of reality. I want to bring balance to the discussion on longevity and extended lifespan. Today I have Dr. Charles Brenner, who is the Alfred E. Mann Chair of the Department of Diabetes and Cancer Metabolism at the City of Hope here in California. In addition to his highly regarded contributions in the field of diabetes and cancer metabolism, Dr. Brenner is one of the most prominent figures in the field of longevity, and one who is not afraid to voice his opinion for a counter argument amongst his peers. Dr. Brenner will share with us today his insight on how metabolism is the crux of really who we are and what we can do, and maybe even more importantly, what we can't do to promote longevity. Dr. Brenner, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So glad to hear you. Tell us a little bit about how you evolved into your area of research, primarily on diabetes and cancer metabolism. And then ultimately we kind of know that metabolism is so important in everything that we do. It has, tentacles that go far beyond simply diabetes and cancer. However, diabetes and cancer are two of the most, ominous things that occur to all of us as we get older. So how did you end up doing that?
By the way, as you know, City of Hope is particularly good at cancer and diabetes. And they created this new department at the interface of cancer and diabetes. And I'm the inaugural chair of that department. So it's a pleasure to move back here to California and to be your neighbor. Essentially, our laboratory is interested in the central catalyst of metabolism, which is a molecule, or really four related molecules called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide coenzymes, NAD coenzymes. And these are the carriers of the high energy electrons that make life possible. So, you may have an electric car sitting outside of your home or office, and it basically exists in two states, right? In the kind of unanimated state and the state in which you push the button and it's moving, right? The difference between a living animal and one that is just hit by lightning and no longer living is the flow of high energy electrons. And NAD coenzymes carry those high energy electrons. So we discovered NR, a vitamin booster of NAD, a number of years ago. And just as importantly, we discovered a technology, or developed a technology called targeted NAD metabolomics. And essentially what we learned from this is the NAD system comes under attack, not only in aging, which you've probably heard a little bit about, but in multiple conditions, some of which are essential to life, like exposure to sunlight. Our DNA gets damaged, and NAD is used in the process of repairing that damage. When we breathe in oxygen, which is essential for life, we generate reactive oxygen species that attack the NAD system. And many disease and conditions like inflammation, coronavirus infection, time zone disruption, heart failure, neurodegeneration, all attack the NAD system.
So I think it's very humble of you to say we kind of, because you were really at the forefront at Dartmouth of discovering NR, the nicotinamide riboside, which, as you stated, it's huge. It's a huge aspect of understanding the enormously complex system of metabolism.
And try to keep it simple here in this hour.
No, I appreciate that because we just reached my peak of being able to comprehend this. But I don't think it can be emphasized enough how important that really is. I mean, and as if the NAD system, that catalyst is not sufficient,
Yeah.
we start to break down.
Right.
Would that be
You
accurate?
can't generate ATP. You can't detoxify free radicals. You can't repair DNA. You can't make your own estrogen and testosterone. You can't make your own lipids. You can't have cell division. So it's essential for life. And it, as I said, it comes under attack. And so the idea, the value proposition behind boosting with NR, which let's do the disclosure here, my technology was licensed by Chromadex and turned into a product called True Niagen. When you take this safety tested NR called Niagen, you're basically boosting and supporting your NAD system that allows your metabolism to function through these inevitable conditions of metabolic stress.
So as the NAD is attacked as you get older and your body starts to have less and less, and you have less ability to repair damage and repair injury, the body starts to break down. So as a way of providing Healthspan,
right,
NAD is hugely important.
Right.
Not necessarily directly, maybe indirectly, lifespan, but Healthspan is going to be important.
Healthspan is what we can move the needle on. So, if you look at animal evolution, every species has a characteristic lifespan. You can take a look at, a mouse, and a naked mole rat, not the Norway rats that get into people's attics and basements, and the New York City subway rat, that's also a Norway rat, but something called a naked mole rat and a mouse are the same size, the same basic body plan, the same what we call genome architecture. The mouse lives about 2 or 3 years. The naked mole rat lives 10 times as long. 10 times as long. And that's genetically encoded. Humans are very good agers. We age better than any primate. And generally, longevity scales with the size of an animal, like whales are really big and they live a really long time. We're not the biggest primate. So gorillas are bigger than humans, but human beings live a longer time. Our closest, relative, chimpanzee, lives half as long or so as humans. And so the human gene set probably limits our lifespan. We think to 120 years. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get beyond that. But the goal is to get more people into our 80s, 90s, 100, and maybe and beyond with good health. And we think that NR is a component of that.
And that will help us, have our the descent from health to death to be a sharp line rather than a slow slope that takes years and years and we continue to die very slowly and uncomfortably.
You don't want to increase frailty, right? You don't want to extend lifespan and increase the amount of time in which you can't take care of yourself. So that drawing that you're making is called squaring the curve, right? And there are, some remarkable examples, of people that were actually Jimmy Carter, giving Sunday school lessons and sermons and going out and building houses into his 90s. This phenomenal person with a very sharp mind. So we want to be like that. We want to, be vital for as long as we can. And most of the tricks are basically things that our moms taught us, right? Which is eat well, drink water as your primary, hydration, stay off of drugs, stay off of cigarettes, stay off of alcohol, and don't believe, people that have fad diets, get enough sleep, be physically active, socially connected, use your mind. Those are the most important things that you can do. And on the margin, I think that Niagen can potentially help people and maintain repair capacity and resiliency. And the nice thing is about Niagen is that we know it's safety tested because we developed it as a new dietary ingredient, generally regarded as safe, did human safety trials, placebo control, and now it's in many trials, 50 or more, for diseasing conditions of metabolic stress and diseasing conditions of aging. And we're starting to get some positive signals in a number of areas.
Can you simplify for me, because I'm confused. I take 2 Niagen, but before that I was taking NMN, we're all doing this to increase our NAD or NAD plus or some of the other coenzymes. Why would somebody take NR versus NMN?
Yeah.
Which is better absorbed? Why? Yeah. How do you direct those of us who want to do what we can without getting fooled that the product doesn't have a good quality or isn't being absorbed?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Niagen, you know what you're getting because it's a patented ingredient and it was safety tested. And it, with NMN for a while, there's a bunch of companies that just said, this is NMN. And it wasn't really clear what was in the bottle. In many cases, wasn't NMN. NMN doesn't entirely make sense because NR is the biggest piece of NAD that can get into cells. It gets into cells, it gets phosphorylated by the enzyme that my lab discovered, nicotinamide riboside kinase, that makes NMN inside of the cell. If you take NMN, then in digestion, the phosphate group is coming off, it's becoming NR again. So basically, you paid a chemist to take NR to NMN, you put it in your mouth with an unclear safety dossier, and then all you got out of that was NR. So NMN didn't really make that much sense. And then now, what's happened is that NMN has been tested as a drug, but the application for that was made apparently before companies filed for new dietary ingredient notifications. And so I'm not sure, but it may be harder to get NMN, but the safety dossier wasn't really there. So NR is the safe way to boost through the NR kinase pathway. And then related compounds, nicotinic acid, nicotinamide, have been around since 1938.
They're in the B vitamin.
Yeah, B3, right? So nicotinic acid, the problem is it causes flushing. It's not used by neurons, so it's not going to be as active in some of the key areas. And then nicotinamide is being tested in certain things. Nicotinamide, there was a large trial in Australia that showed cancer preventative activity with regular vitamin B3 nicotinamide. And there's some other trials that are working on nicotinamide. But we think that NR is the sort of highest value form of vitamin B3 because these conditions in which NAD comes under attack, the NR genes, the NR kinase genes get upregulated. So it looks like a damaged cell is looking for NR in order to boost its NAD. We've seen many cases, in which the NR pathway gets upregulated when NAD is under attack.
When I think of how we can repair ourselves, I think of the inflammatory cascade, and inflammation can be, it's our life source, and it can also be, our greatest detriment. How does NR play in the anti-inflammatory or inflammatory cascade?
So it was actually the first human result that had a really clearly positive result. Is a first human trial. There were older men in the UK, and they did I was on a paper. It was El Hassan and coworkers, and in a placebo-controlled trial, NR lowered inflammatory markers, things like IL-6, IL-10, and that's great, right? Because this chronic inflammation is associated with a lot of bad outcomes. As you said, inflammation is what the body is trying to do to defend itself. So it's not in itself a bad thing, but the chronic inflammation is something that can essentially age you. And we think that due to this anti-inflammatory mechanism, that is the basis for protection against things like COVID infection. So we showed that coronavirus induces a process that attacks NAD, turns on 5 genes that use up NAD in trying to fight the infection. And then that led to a phase 2-3 trial in Sweden and Turkey, I think. And that showed that NR, in combination with 3 other over-the-counter molecules, accelerated recovery, time to recovery from COVID. And we think that NR was the critical active ingredient. And that trial, it's not just me thinking that. There's about 4 follow-up studies where it's NR alone, trying to protect the kidney in COVID, trying to protect it and support recovery in long COVID, which is also an inflammatory condition. So that's a really good question.
Is there a contraindication to NR, or what are the detrimental effects?
Not that we know of. The human safety trials have been beautifully clean. So they're placebo controlled. And so if you look at enough, person days, you'll see, somebody had a headache. But in a placebo-controlled trial, you can see whether there's excess events when people were taking the tested compound. And we've never seen anything come up in a placebo-controlled trial that made us concerned. At the conclusion of the Parkinson's trial, small Parkinson's trial in Norway, the funding agency, which I think was the Norwegian government, asked Chromadex to provide NR to all the participants, because some were on placebo, some were on, NR. They unblinded the study. They saw improvement in cerebral blood flow in Parkinson's, and they said, sure, we want to do a larger trial, but we want to give everybody that participated in this trial NR at this point. So it's been beautifully safe, and it's exciting for me because I was a yeast person trying to figure out how an enzyme works in 2002-3, when I discovered this vitamin activity in a pathway, and now it's gone all the way up to humans and helping a lot of people.
Which is pretty impressive, because you get something to get to the human level with some real peer-reviewed back studies is pretty impressive. One of the things, one of the oxymorons I think that bothers me is when people say I want to age gracefully, because to me, aging is cancer, it's diabetes, it's Parkinson's, it's Alzheimer's, it's sarcopenia, all of these things that happen as we get older. And things that, scare a lot of people. It scares me, as, when we think of the fact that, we're heading in that direction. But it would seem that something like NR is an easy step to not prevent us from getting there, but perhaps, slow that process. Let me ask you this about the anti-aging market, because if with True Niagen, you're in a mix of a whole lot of other supplements that are out there.
Yeah.
And, it's separating, fact from fiction, hyperbole from reality, and beauty from and BS. Let me talk, I want to go into anti-aging for a second. You have been called an anti-aging specialist. Your products are anti-aging, in to the layperson. But I know that you personally have a little discomfort using
With the term anti-aging.
The term
Yes.
anti-aging.
For exactly the reasons that you talk about, the hyperbole, the non-evidence-based nature of the things in the category, right?
So what do you, in your area of, say, where your research is going, how would you label that? Is it longevity? Is it,
Well, I don't call NR an anti-aging drug. I say that the use case is to promote resiliency and protect against disease and conditions that attack the NAD system. So, we can do a trial on fatty liver. We can do a trial on peripheral neurodegeneration. We can do a trial in mild cognitive impairment or Parkinson's, and we want to see positive results that protect people's health. I'm not real comfortable with promises that something is going to extend someone's life, because you can't do a trial, that would demonstrate that. What would you do? You'd have to enlist people that are 105 years old, so that in a 3 or 4 year trial, you would see people in the placebo group dropping off and people in the experimental group being protected. Maybe you could do that trial, but I don't think that people that are 105 years old are representative of people that are 60 or 70. I mean, those are people that are 105 are super agers. We don't understand why they're so terrific. They've got great genes, So I'm not comfortable with people that make claims that metformin or rapamycin are going to be longevity drugs. I don't think that there's evidence to be particularly optimistic about those molecules. And then, like you said, the whole category is a mix of things that are cosmetic, mythological, and in a few cases based on science. And, I want to stick with the science.
The landscape has changed over the first part of the century from a denial and the belief that life can be significantly extended to the belief that it's not only quite possible, but likely that we might be benefiting, even those people who are living today might benefit from life extension. But a lot of that is based now on, I think, the revenue that's now involved in this field. What is your take on all of this that's going on in this field of longevity?
Well, a lot of the investment is going into something called partial reprogramming, which some of the people that invested in it were made to think that it's been demonstrated in a mouse. It really hasn't. The principle of reprogramming is what's called induced pluripotency, Yamanaka factors. So you can take a fibroblast, you can actually take blood cells from people, and you can treat them with these 4 genes in the laboratory. And in the laboratory, you can get a cell from a 61-year-old guy like me to go back in time to what's called pluripotency, which is almost like, one cell stage of of an embryo, that it can develop into everything. It could develop into a brain and musculature and, a body plan and everything. But the thing is that the part that they don't tell you is that when you do that in the laboratory, some of the cells die, some of the cells form tumors, some of the cells form horrific things called teratomas, and you have trained people in the laboratory that are getting rid of all of those cells. And you're cloning the well-behaved cell that is going back to induce pluripotency. And then from that, you could use it to develop an organoid or like cardiomyocytes that beat as though they were a human heart or whatever. But that's way different than reprogramming a living mouse. And when they put these factors into mice, they either get tumors and teratomas, and then they rarely publish those results, or they publish results where they say the epigenetic clock was moved back. But all I don't want to get too technical here, but the Yamanaka factors target the clock. They target the clock. So you can't use the clock to determine whether or not they rejuvenated. If you're looking at the clock, that just says that you used Yamanaka factors. That doesn't mean that no one has shown any functional rejuvenation of any mice. And there are human studies that are even less convincing than the mouse studies. So I think that they have an uphill slog. I think that the investors are going to be fairly disappointed when they better understand the science. And so I think that improving people's health and fitness and resiliency and allowing us to achieve our genetically encoded lifespan is a very achievable goal, and that's basically where I live.
So it sounds like you think there's a disconnect between what the public believes, what their perception is, and what happens in the laboratory, and what is clinically applicable in vivo.
Very much so.
Are there longevity genes?
Not as described by the best-selling book on aging. There are what are called monogenic longevity genes, which means you just make mutations in one gene, but you have to knock it out or you have to inactivate that gene, and you can get much longer living mice, right? So this is a story of what are called the Ames mice, the Snell mice, the little mice. All of these are in the same pathway. They're in the growth hormone pathway. And when you inactivate, believe it or not, Dr. Grossman, there are people that are called mouse fanciers that love mice the way we love our dogs and cats. Okay? And they discovered these dwarf mice. They thought that they were incredibly cute because a mouse is supposed to be, about this big. And they popped up in 3 different, locations, these dwarf mice. And then they found out that they couldn't breed them because neither the male dwarfs nor the female dwarfs were fertile. It was only when they're heterozygous, when they have one good copy and one bad copy, that if you take that male and mate it to a heterozygous female, you can get a quarter of the offspring are going to be these tiny mice that are super, super long-lived. But you want to know something? Those mice can't compete for resources. They can't mate, right? Those are the super long-lived mice. They're dwarf mice, right? And now what's in contrast to that, what was described in a best-selling book is a story, a fabulous is not a good thing in science, a fabulous story in which someone claims that they identified dominantly acting longevity genes. They identified them in yeast, and those genes were dominantly active and conferred longevity in flies and worms and in mice and in people. And that's just not true. It's not even true in yeast. Extra copies of those genes don't promote the extended lifespan of yeast. The whole thing is a fabulous story, but it's not true and it's not evidence-based. And here's the thing. It makes a big difference whether it's a dominantly acting longevity gene or inactivating mutations in the longevity gene. Why? Because CRISPR. So the people that watch your podcast may have heard of CRISPR. CRISPR is somebody has we can now do this in mice routinely, and it's beginning to be done for human beings. Somebody has a bad gene, you can CRISPR in a good gene, right? So if there were dominantly acting longevity genes, like if SIRT1 was a dominantly acting longevity gene, then you could CRISPR that in and we would potentially live longer, right?
Right.
But, I went to the big confab in Las Vegas in, I think it was December, the A4M meeting, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, A4M. I gave a big talk there, 2,000 person room. And outside of the lecture hall, there's a exhibition gallery, right? You know what people are selling there? You know what they're selling. They're selling growth hormone. They're selling anabolic steroids. They're selling estrogen injections, right? And the genetics says that more growth hormone might make you bigger and stronger for a while, but it's probably going to accelerate aging, and less growth hormone, so little that you're not even fertile and that you don't grow to a normal size. Less growth hormone extends your lifespan, right? So, we don't want to do anti-aging medicine that's going to lower our growth hormone and our vitality. No one is suggesting that. So, that's the problem in this field, is that it sounds like I'm getting into big words, dominant versus recessive genes, and I'm criticizing certain scientists, and people are saying, oh, this is just going over my head. Brenner admitted that there's longevity genes. Yeah, I'm telling you, there's longevity genes that you would not want to inactivate. If you inactivate those longevity genes, if you inactivate those genes for growth hormone, you're going to become flaccid and lose your muscle mass, and you're not going to age well.
Right. And I would think that from an evolutionary standpoint, evolution would knock you out even if you lived longer, if you didn't have the capacity to be fit.
Evolution is all about reproductive fitness. So here's an interesting connection between sort of cosmetic medicine and the biology of aging, is that in terms of evolutionary biology, it really is about sex appeal in some sense, because the turtles that live 100-some years mate to over 100-some years. Sharks that live 180 years are reproductively active that whole time. And basically evolution will preserve your gene set if you're capable of carrying on your gene set, right? There's a really interesting exception to the rule, though, which is the human female. The human female is one of the only animals in all of nature that outlives her reproductive capacity, right? Because average onset of menopause is 51, and women live into their mid-80s on average, right? So she's living 35 or so years beyond her reproductive ability as an individual. But apparently in human evolution, mothers and grandmothers were so important that our species survived better when we had women, basically contribute all of their eggs into the gene pool before they're 50 and still were able to care for us into their 6th, 7th, and 8th decade. In part, it's because human babies are so inept. Like, you can see a giraffe drop and within an hour stand up and start walking, and you can see a chimpanzee that is an infant that can actually hang onto its mother. Human babies can hardly do anything. All they can do is basically suck. So they can get, nursing, but they have to be held. And, if you have teenage kids or 20-something-year-old kids, it takes a long time to produce a fully functioning human, which is why in human evolution, we think that women, lose their ability to, reproduce when they're 50-ish. But in general, in the evolution of animal longevity, you see longer-lived animals are animals that have sex appeal longer. That's basically what it is, because it's integrating their every sense, their musculature, their circulatory system, their ability to smell and, responds to their mate, all of that coordination and everything. And humans actually do, like I say, humans do that really well. They do it better than chimpanzees and gorillas.
Yeah, it would seem like from an evolutionary standpoint, evolution has no need for you once you're done procreating. And
except the human female.
Yeah. But I wonder over time now, obviously evolution, a longer period of time, but now that where we don't necessarily need the grandparent to care for the child while the mother is harvesting, crops or preparing the meals, that happened for over thousands of years. As we become more technologically advanced, I wonder if from an evolutionary standpoint.
So here's the problem. Here's the problem is that you need a selection, right? So, according to this line of thinking, there's a scientist named Michael Rose who was a faculty member at UC Irvine. And he said, if I wanted to get longer lived flies, what I need to do is I need to keep males and females separate until they're near the end of their expected life, near the end of their life expectancy. Then I will allow them to mate. And if he did that repeatedly over generation, then he was able to select for longer lived flies, right? Well, the problem with human is we kind of peak in our sex appeal at 20-ish, right?
Yep.
And,
maybe some people would argue, but
I mean, I'm trying to be the gray fox or whatever, but I can't remember what the term is. But what you'd have to do, you'd have to have humans where you didn't let men reproduce until they were 80, and you wouldn't let them reproduce with women until they were 45. If you did that, if you had only very old men and middle-aged women reproducing, then you would be doing a selection for humans that can reproduce and can function really, really well. So it would be only the fittest 45-year-old women that had the best likelihood of longevity, and only Mick Jagger, right, among men. So, but we don't, it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, hard to get that control group.
You're stuck. It's not happening. And this is, there's tens of thousands of generations of human selection have given us the gene set that we have. And like I say, it's not going to be one gene CRISPR'd in that is going to change our lifespan. If you were to do that selection, you would be selecting for alterations in thousands of our genes. And so that's why I don't see, CRISPR as an enabling technology. I don't see epigenetic reprogramming changing very much. And so I think that the best thing that we can do is follow mom's advice and, not listen to too many podcasts and maybe boost our NAD.
So let me come at you as someone who wants to defend the optimism of life expectancy. And what you've talked about right now is that it's more along the lines of life expectancy, right? That life expectancy has been increased by public health, by sanitation, vaccines, better healthcare, better self-care. Right. But lifespan, the maximum amount that we can live, really, that needle hasn't moved very much at all. And hundreds of years. I mean, you've seen people who were in their 90s in the 1600s and 1700s. Not as many, but they were there. The maximal lifespan reportedly is 122 years.
Right.
But with the accelerated speed of computational technology now, and if metabolism is the focus of a lot of the problems that we have, because it's what we need to live, but metabolism itself means our cells are going to go through damage, just the whole process of it. But if damage as a result of metabolism is the most significant factor in the decline of our cells, with the accelerated speed of computational technology, are these just issues of simple engineering?
I don't think it doesn't sound simple to me, as a professional metabolism guy. Our enzymes are extremely well optimized. Humans age better than chimps and gorillas. We don't understand enough about, connective tissue biology and neuroscience. So if it were in a moonshot, you have a goal. You know where the moon is, right? And you're not denying gravity. You're using counterposing forces so that you launch a rocket in that direction. But in the case of, human, you'd have to do it in a mouse first, right? Before you, as a demonstration project. And I just don't see the progress as a person in the field. I see a lot of papers that really overstated their case, are not reproducible. The idea of, trying to engineer metabolism is interesting, but it's harder than a moonshot. I don't see it as a simple engineering problem.
In my area of practice and the focus of this podcast, I've emphasized how one has to sift through a lot of bullshit. But if you do it, you can find some real pearls and how to, things that are beneficial to us as human beings. You have not been shy about calling bullshit on things that you see in your field, and we've kind of subtly mentioned some best-selling books that we're going to talk about in a minute. Do you feel that in the field of longevity research and longevity marketing that there is more hype than reality right now?
Yeah, I really do. I debated Aubrey de Grey. I know he's been on your show. Didn't seem like real plans to me. He had no, it was, he told me, I don't understand what he's trying to do because I'm a scientist and he's an engineer, and look at what the Wright brothers did. But I actually know something about the Wright brothers, and they had falsifiable hypotheses about every single part that they put into the plane. They built a wind tunnel to test their ideas and to test units that went into the wing and the units that went into the propeller and so forth and so on. So they, Aubrey, wrote down a list that he said are the 7 types of damage. He came up with that list in the year 2000. As late as last year, he was claiming that no one had challenged him on them, therefore they must be true. And, in real time, I told him loss of repair capacity is not on your list. And, and then he told me that was not a permissible cause of aging. And it's an established fact that loss of repair capacity, is a component of aging. And, he says that he's going to do things like, remove intracellular damage, but we don't have a way to introduce genetic constructs into all the cells of our body, and we don't even know what all of the types of damage there are. And, we have non-dividing cells like neurons, and how are you going to deal with the unintended consequences of expressing enzymes in neurons? So, to me, it's not a real plan. And I know it's been pitched to a lot of crypto guys and other people that are sort of true believers, and it just doesn't work for me.
So Aubrey, I think is kind of a pioneer in his philosophical approach to longevity, but perhaps the person right now who has the biggest name and is probably the most visible in the longevity market is Dr. David Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
You have not been shy in voicing your differences in opinion to some of the things that he says. Now, on the one hand, I want to ask you: is that he's generated attention to the field, generated some attention by sharing the supplements that he takes. In defense of him, he doesn't tell you to take them; he just tells you this is what I take and why I take it. But myself included, when I heard that, I go, "Oh, maybe I'll take that. I don't see a problem with it." And then you just wonder, is it's kind of a slippery slope if there's not science behind it. So again, from the optimist point of view, I want to believe what Sinclair is saying. Tell me why that may not be the safest path.
It's not the safest path because it's not evidence-based. I mean, he's telling you things that are terrific stories. I like to remind people that from the Western civilization tradition, we named a person the father of history, someone named Herodotus. Herodotus is the person that wrote the story about the battle on the plains of Marathon, the Persian War, where the guy ran 26.2 miles and collapsed at the end of that war. He also wrote the story of a fictitious people called the Macrobians that he said bathed in magical waters and didn't age. So these kinds of stories are thousands of years old, and everybody likes to hear those stories. And so David tells the story that he found longevity genes in yeast, and those are longevity genes in invertebrates like worms and flies, and that there are longevity genes in mice and people, and none of those things are true. He says that he identified resveratrol as an activator of one of these gene products, something called resveratrol. He claimed is an activator of sirtuin-1, and it's not. And and billions of dollars have been put into testing that statement, and it's false. His company, Certrus, and I know this very well because at the time I was a consultant at Certrus because of my work on the NAD system. I saw data that indicated that resveratrol does not activate SIRT1, that the new compounds that they discovered at Certrus did not activate SIRT1. I thought there were serious problems with the company. And then, he and a few others got on an airplane and sold the company to GSK for $720 million. And GSK put billions of dollars into clinical development and testing after that purchase, and it basically didn't work. They didn't hit the target. The target wasn't validated for, moving the needle on disease and conditions of aging. And there's a literature that says that use of resveratrol can, for every one trial that shows that it did nothing, there's another trial that shows that it might have helped some cardiovascular parameters. And there's another trial showing that it hurt some cardiovascular parameters. So, basically it's expensive P in some sense because people are putting money into it and and not getting improvements in health. And in other cases, it could be taxing your liver and making you sick. So, he's not from my point of view, a credible person. His work doesn't really test hypotheses in a way that they could be falsified in the type of way that we try to get evidence for things in science. But he's a very, very gifted storyteller. And so that's part of the hazard, really, is that it's a very compelling story. My dad was, not very active, and then I got him on resveratrol and so on and so on. But no, I think the public should beware of that type of storytelling.
Are there people in the field that you feel are ones that we should follow, that that they are science-based, are on the leading edge, based on true shareable data?
I don't think that there's anything that's super actionable right now. For humans, you can follow the whole aging, science community on Twitter. There's Brian Kennedy, Matt Kaberlein, Morgan Levine, Bjorn Schumacher. Bjorn Schumacher is an excellent scientist who works on DNA repair. But it's not like there's something super actionable right now. There's a drug development process for dogs that's kind of interesting to me. It's going to start out with a particular species that I think doesn't really age quite the same way as other dogs do, but it would be a very interesting proof of principle drug if it gets approved for dogs. So that's being developed by Loyal. Celine Hallelujah, I can't remember, no, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her surname right, but Loyal is the name of the company that's trying to do that. But that's not going to be super actionable for humans, like I said, because it's a particular species of dog that is their first target. But, the people that are being really honest and saying that, like you said, that health span and life expectancy was extended due to public health. If people say that, they're being honest with you. If they talk about, sirtuins and dominant longevity genes, I would run the other way. If they talk about modulation of TOR pathway and growth hormone, then there's a degree of seriousness to that. But I still don't think that that's actionable. And, I think that there are people that could be impairing their health by taking rapamycin right now because, I've told a number of people I'd be more likely to take leucine than rapamycin. I've met bodybuilders and stuff that take leucine and leucine analogs because they're trying to bulk up. They're trying to, boost their mTOR pathway. And then they're also taking rapamycin. So basically, it doesn't make any sense. I'd have to have a whiteboard and do more biochemistry than I think your viewers want me to. But, rapamycin, when it's been tested in humans, has blunted the beneficial effects of exercise. And there's almost nothing that's as good as exercise for healthy aging. You want to maintain your skeletal muscle mass and your heart function.
What are your thoughts about alpha-ketoglutarate?
It's kind of hilarious, actually. It must have come out of a worm trial. Alpha-ketoglutarate is just a citric acid cycle intermediate. And alpha-ketoglutarate interchangeable with glutamate, which is one of the most abundant compounds in the human body. The idea that more alpha-ketoglutarate is going to extend your health span or lifespan is, to me, laughable. And I was very surprised that that's what, a certain person came up with in their new supplement. It makes no sense. Unless you're a worm. If you're a worm, then take it. I just don't know any ones in my community.
Tell me something positive in the field of diabetic research. Where do you see advancements in diabetes are going to be in the next 10 years?
Well, gosh, I mean, how do you not be impressed with GLP-1 receptor agonists? That is just an amazing, amazing story. So I'm talking about things like semaglutide, Wegovy, GLP-1 RAs. Absolutely remarkable as, weight loss drugs, and for type 2 diabetics, activity for type 1 diabetics as well, which is a little bit harder thing for me to get my head around. But, that class of drugs allowing people to succeed in their efforts to control their dietary intake has been remarkable. And so I'd love to see them become more available. I noticed that Weight Watchers actually bought Sequence, which Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who's a friend of mine, started a company to do telemedicine in this space. And they were just acquired by Weight Watchers. So Weight Watchers is looking at the space. Weight Watchers for decades has seen, here are the people that can follow through on their diet plans, and here are the people that can't. And then they look at Wegovy, semaglutide literature, and they basically see it's helping virtually everyone, achieve their goals of weight loss due to, controlling their appetite. So I think that's huge. I particularly got interested in fatty liver. So we have a new model for fatty liver, which also actually develops into hepatocarcinoma, which is a terrible type of malignancy that's on the rise now. So we're interested in some rare diseases. We're interested in fatty liver, diabetes, cancer.
It's pretty amazing stuff and pretty highbrow stuff. It's gone to school for a long time, and half the stuff we're saying, I think I know what he's talking about. Yeah. I got to tell you, I've been so appreciative of you coming on here and telling a side of the longevity perspective that some of us don't always have, especially for doing it on a podcast. Because if in a podcast you grab listeners by listening to how long you can live and adding encouragement, but that's not balance. And again, our goal is separating the BS from what's really out there.
There's a friend of mine who taught me something called Betteridge's Law.
Tell us.
Betteridge's Law is that any headline that is written as a question mark, the answer is almost always no. So, for example, if the headline is, could alpha-ketoglutarate be the key to increasing your lifespan? The answer is no. Could this new worm experiment show you be the cure for diabetes? Again, the answer is probably no. So, most of those, clickbait type things are not evidence-based. And, you got to live your life. And most people that tell you that there are easy answers and that things are easy, engineering problems, are not in the trenches trying to do the work.
Dr. Charles Brenner, the Alfred E. Mann Chair at the Department of Diabetes and Cancer Metabolism at City of Hope. Thank you so much for enlightening all of us, for participating. I know you are extremely busy and extremely in demand, so you being here has been a joy for me, and I thank you for your time.
thanks. People can follow our work on Twitter at Charles M. Brenner. They can find the website at brennerlab.net, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
I would encourage our listeners to follow Dr. Brenner. It's very enlightening, and I think you can hear a lot of good information and dispel a lot of bad information. Again, Dr. Brenner, thanks so much for being here. And thank all of you for joining us on Beauty and the BS, and we look forward to having you join us next time. The Beauty and the BS podcast executive producer is me, Dr. Peter Grossman. Our producers are Max Banta and John Largent, and editing and post-production services are provided by Game Day Media. You can listen to Beauty and the BS wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like to leave a comment or ask me a question, go to beautyandthebspodcast.com and click on the microphone icon, and we may use your comment on a future episode. You can also find our archives, video clips, and more on the website as well. Thanks for listening to Beauty and the BS with Dr. Peter Grossman.